And I think when you have that nagging voice in your head, or even external, as it was for me, saying you're worthless, it makes you really aware of any way that you can prove that there's something special. I wanted to prove to the world that I was not worthless, and I wanted to use art to do that. But I had to reframe and realize that there's a whole lot more to this life than proving something. If you are coming at your existence from a place of proving something, I think you're missing out on a lot.
Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast presented by Destination Arete. I'm David.
And I'm Mark. And as brothers, we grew up telling stories together for over 15 years. And as adults, we want to continue telling stories together. And we want to invite you into our brothers' brain trust.
We started this podcast to share the beginning of our story, the stories that influenced us, the stories that made us want to be storytellers, and then to continue writing that story together wherever this podcast ends up taking us.
How that kind of manifests itself is in the idea that we are building a community of people who work together to find creative solutions to tell inspirational stories.
So today we're talking with illustrator Joe Hox. Mark, I found out about Joe through another Joe. We interviewed Joe Sutphin earlier in the episodes. He was working on a graphic novel. Joe is now coloring the graphic novel. I cannot wait. But I want people to hear this interview with Joe Hox because today Joe shares with us how construction paper and high cheekbones helped him realize art mattered to him, even as a third grader, and how he overcame an extremely negative internal narrative.
Yeah, Joe also shares with us how losing his ability to draw ended up actually being the most important moment in his art career, and the importance that community played in that journey of recovery. So without further ado, I cannot wait for you guys to hear this episode with illustrator Joe Hox.
I go professionally by Joe Hox, Joehox. My real name is Joe Hoxbergen. I just got sick of spelling it for people. And it kind of sounds like you have to chew on it. And I didn't like how it sounded. I was always a little bit self-conscious growing up about it. So Joe Hox, nice symmetry to the three letters and three letters. Anyway, I am an illustrator and an artist, and I have dabbled in every kind of art you can imagine. Mostly just because of my own restless spirit. But truly from very, very early on, my passion has been illustration. The artists that I follow are mostly illustrators, some fine artists. You guys interviewed TJ Cunningham. I'm a big fan of his. I was excited to see that you interviewed him. I have always loved art. And we can talk more about where that came from, but some listeners may know me from the Good News for Little Hearts series. This is a series of Christian kids books so New Growth Press partnered with the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation, and they took different issues that kids struggle with, especially ones that they would see a Christian counselor for. And so they took these different issues and they wrote a book about different ones. They partnered with well-known Christian thinkers and writers for the editing on these books. And this was kind of my first gig, how I really got my feet wet in a broader market outside of my own small town of Pella, Iowa. And then the project I'm most excited about lately, and I'm excited to see it enlarging its circle, is this book, Who is Jesus? 40 Pictures to Share with Your Family. And this was a passion project of my wife and mine. My wife is Kate Hox, and she and I have worked on that for 7 years. And we had submitted it to various publishers, and we had a few different conversations with them, but as I'm sure you've heard from other folks in publishing, it's kind of tricky to get into that world. And so we decided to do a Kickstarter to speed things along. And just as we were poised, we had even done a lot of promotional material for this Kickstarter. We were ready to start posting that on social media, and then New Growth Press, who had done the animal books, reached out to us and asked, hey, if we looked at that. And they had looked at it a couple of times, but they looked at it more seriously this time for whatever reason, and they published it. And we've been really excited about this project. And I was assigned to start off with talking about this book because we really want to see it get into people's homes, not just because it's good for us from a business perspective, but we really believe in this project, and we've worked really hard on it. The idea behind this one is it's all biblical theology, and biblical theology is all the parts of the Bible are one whole, and they all point to Jesus Christ. And so we took 20 stories from the Old Testament and 20 stories from the New that all really point us to who Christ is. And we wrote it in such a way that families of different ages can enjoy it. So Katie did all the writing. She's between you and me, don't let this get out, but she's like 10 times smarter than I am. And then I did the illustrating. And this is a different style than I usually work in.
I was gonna say
it's wood cuts. And so you guys interviewed Stephen Kratz a while back, who he was a real inspiration for me on these. I have to give him some credit.
awesome.
Seeing his stuff. And for those of you who haven't seen Stephen's stuff, you got to take a look. It's superb. I think, yeah, that's how I'll answer the first question.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We will we'll put links to all that stuff, and I think as of recording this episode's coming out in the distant future,
Okay.
like in 2023. So I'm hoping that this will still be a benefit to you guys, and we'll make sure our audience knows where to find it. But you
Thanks, guys.
you talked about, like, getting your feet wet. What was it like? I know this is kind of bleeding into our first question, but what was it like, before you got that big break? Like, how did you stay motivated? Like, were there times where you just said, all right, I just got to keep drawing, even though this isn't for a client, or what, can you tell us something about your mindset during that time before you had that big break, I guess is the question I have.
That's a good question. And the more I've talked with other artists, the more I find this is a universal issue to have this. I think God implanted this desire for some folks. They may not even realize that, but I think there's this deep urge or need to be creating. And I've had that forever. And even during the times when success seemed like impossible, I had to keep sketching. And so I've been pretty obsessed since probably third grade. I've been keeping sketchbooks, and I sketch every day. It's how I kind of interpret the world. And also I was the youngest child in my family, so I think it's also how I got attention when I was fighting. You're with me?
Me too.
Like I say, Mark is tracking with this. Mark's third grade sketchbooks, youngest child. Now he got plenty of attention, so I want to get the record straight here. So nobody feels sorry for Mark. But
it's true.
That's what my siblings think too.
Yeah, that's what the older brother's here for. That's why there's an older brother on this podcast. Yeah. No, go ahead, Mark. Sorry. All right, Joe. Well, Mark, do you have anything you want to ask, or are you ready for us to get here to our questions that we sent?
I think we enrolled right into the first question. So, Joe, again, we just want to ask you, when was the moment, or what was, the journey like leading up to the moment where you knew, man, I want to share these images that I am making with other people?
So there is a bit of a story. So buckle up.
Go for it.
So I grew up on a farm in southern Iowa, and one could say, I never got this verified, but one could say that I was the single awkwardest clumsiest farm kid that ever existed. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the beauty of like being outside all the time, and we were, it was kind of a rugged part of Iowa. There's a lot of old coal mine land, so land that was all torn up for coal mines. Not great farmland, but a lot of pastures, and so there's a lot of trees and these kind of knobby hills. And I loved that. I loved the environment I grew up in. Very loving Christian parents, and very forgiving. And the fact of the matter was, and it objectively, I was really bad at being a farm kid, and I could go into examples, most of them having to do with driving heavy machinery into stuff, but and it all this was confirmed by a relative who helped out on the farm a lot, and his nickname for me was Worthless. In fact, for all the years of growing up, I never heard this individual call me by my name. And I always played it off as like a joke, but man, it hurt every time, because I knew he was kind of right. Like I did not help move the ball down the field, so to speak, on the farm. I was a little bit lazy. I would much prefer being inside watching Bob Ross paint than outside, helping fix fence or whatever. And I think when you have that nagging voice in your head, or even external, as it was for me, saying you're worthless, it makes you really aware of any way that you can prove that there's something special. And so I was, early on in grade school, I was very much on the lookout for what is my gift. Probably earlier than typical. I really wanted to find whatever my career would be early on. And it happened in second grade. Our teacher assigned us to make Native American dioramas. And I was assigned to the Sioux village. And I looked around, and my classmates were making these little like stick figure type of Native Americans. And then I looked at my Native American, and it was cut out of construction paper, and it had the high cheekbones drawn on, and windswept hair, and a detailed feathered headdress. And I realized, wow, I care about this a lot more than my classmates. And that was the first time I thought, oh, maybe there's potential here. If I would, my partner ended up with the silly diorama, and he's a lawyer now, so I don't dare go and chase after it. But I think if I saw it today, I would think, oh, this is pathetic. But for me, it was like this little ember was getting the breeze blown on it, and it became my job over the next few years to kind of just keep fanning that ember and growing in skill. And so I obsessed over anything artistic, and I started asking my parents for sketchbooks, and they lovingly complied, and gave me as much paper as I needed to keep drawing. And I just kept at it. So that was kind of where it all started. I looked for inspiration everywhere, especially in kids' books. I loved the illustrations that I would find there. Joe Sutphin mentioned in the interview with you guys that he wasn't really much of a reader, but it was the illustrations that really captivated him, and I really related to him when he said that really, yeah. I love story, but kind of like Joe said, it's part of it's an attention thing. I don't think I can pay attention to story much if there aren't pictures, even to this day. So yeah, that's how I got my start.
That's awesome. I love how you said, I looked around and I said, wow, I care like a lot about this compared to my classmates, because I love
Yeah.
that idea, because there's usually something in us that we just naturally we care about, you know, and there's other
Yeah.
things that we don't care about. I remember playing
Mhm.
sports as a kid and just being like, that is a ball that has air in it. You want me to sacrifice my body, the one body God gave me? You want me to throw myself out of bounds to try to rescue that? You know, like I was like, no, I'm out. I'm done. You know, like I will go so
Totally
far,
relate to
but
that.
I will not do that.
Yes.
But you know, when it came to getting, you know, the number of buttons right on a military uniform or getting the color just right, you know, it was like, no, this is top priority. This is important. Everybody
Yes.
back off, you know. So I definitely relate to finding that thing that you care about, and I love the way you phrase that. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
What what well, I don't know how to ask this, but well, I just want to say like it's interesting that you said about that ember. Because
Mm.
whether you're a lawyer or a drawer, right?
Mhm.
There is an ember, and I just think it's cool that like how looking back, how valuable was it that your parents were able to give you paper? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, man.
can you talk about that at all? Because that seems like a
Yeah.
key ingredient for folks who discover the ember and then need to fan it and feed it, you know, kindling, such as sometimes as paper. But can you talk about that at all? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
First, that's a really insightful question. I really appreciate that, because I do want to give them credit. My parents, my dad he's a farmer through and through, and he really um I think his mantra, whether he spoke it or not, was, you know, you prove yourself by working really hard. You work your hands to the bone. And the fact that his identity was so wrapped up in the farm that he could still appreciate what I was doing, um, it meant the world to me. It was he didn't just put up with me. He really encouraged me, even though he lacked the language for it. So he had when when he gives a compliment, he has in art, he has no idea what he's talking about. But he tried, and I saw him trying, and I so appreciate it. My mom was much more artistic. She's been a graphic designer for 30 some years, and so she understood, you know, that you need to, if you have this creative impulse, you need to kind of follow it. So she's always been sympathetic, but it I think it meant more coming from my dad, that he was willing to encourage me, even though I was speaking a totally different language than he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving on here, are you still a sketchbook guy, or if you have to start a new project or a new illustration tomorrow, maybe your wife comes to you, you know, after we hang up and she says, I've written a whole nother book, you know, she probably will,
Mhm.
know it from what you said about her. But
Probably.
what's the first step for you, or what's the most important step, or do you already have a bank of ideas that you can just go, oh, here they are, here we go, you know, or how does that work?
Okay. Speaking about bank of ideas, I'm going to quick show you. For those of you who are just listening, I apologize. For those of you who are just listening, I'm holding up some boxes, and these boxes are pages that I've torn out of my sketchbooks over the last little while, of ideas that I think have potential. So I respect those people that have nice, neat, clean sketchbooks and just keep this like organized library. And I've tried to do that, but it just doesn't work. And I always end up, you know, finding some stupid post-it that's like folded 5 times and doing my best work on there. And so I end up with these boxes just jammed full of sketches, usually very rough and ugly, but they have this some idea. And yeah, I do a lot more sketching than those boxes, but it gives you an idea of kind of this bank of ideas that I am always kind of adding to. And then as far as sketchbooks go, so I found that when I'm doing a really nice drawing, I like to use good paper. But when I'm just coming up with ideas, good paper tends to freeze me up. I don't want to ruin anything. I get all far too precious. And so often I'll go to the thrift store and I'll buy one of these, like it's like meant to be a photo album. It has like cardstock paper. And then I'll get a table saw and saw it in half. So I get 2 for the price of 1 for all you cheap
Genius.
artists out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Art hack.
Art
Literally
hack.
Yeah. Literally hacking it in half.
Yeah. Literally, yeah.
Very nice. Yeah.
So how does drawing to you relate to the idea? What is the relationship for you between drawing and ideas? And then how does that play a role kind of going into the final piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was a really artist question to
Yeah,
ask.
sorry.
That's why he's here.
I love it. Yeah.
I just
Um,
that's the, like on those like abstract documentaries on Netflix, those are the kind of questions they ask. And I'm always like, ooh, I
yeah.
want to ask those. Like I want
Yeah.
to be like, so what's the relationship between, the final product and the
Very nice.
But we do want to know.
yeah, but we want to know.
I can barely function without sketching while I'm trying to function. That's so since I was young, since diorama age, I've had a sketchbook in my hand, and the more time went by, the more I was sketching everywhere. So I sketch in church in order to help process sermons better. By the way, John Hendricks, do you know who he is?
Possibly, but not off the top of my head.
John Hendricks is let's see, he's an award-winning illustrator, also teaches in St. Louis, teaches art courses, but he keeps a church sketchbook. And if anybody is interested in kind of an offbeat version of church sketches, his aren't just illustrations of the sermon. His take it to an entirely different level. And anyway, that's an aside.
A welcome one.
Sketching everywhere I go. In fact, I had a teacher. I was blessed to be able to go to a Christian school when I was a kid. Had a great experience there, but I was a hopeless student, and I had a lot of wonderful teachers that walked alongside me. So I was in Bible class. I was getting like a D-, very bad grade, and I had an old school teacher named Bill Hartman, and he was very old school. He always wore a suit to school, and then he would smoke a pipe at break time. I don't know how he got by with that, but he was very strict, and you wouldn't expect him to also be very kind, because he came off as just kind of gruff and authoritarian. But I was doing really poorly in his class, and he saw that I loved art. And he said, how about instead of taking regular tests like all the other kids, what if you draw the ideas that we've discussed in class? So I want to see the same details that we covered. If it were a Bible story, I want to see everything that all the other kids are writing on the test, but I want to see it visually. And my mind was blown. I didn't know that was allowed. I thought school was supposed to be a prison, but all of a sudden I was given an avenue to process ideas visually, and it was allowed, and it wasn't an art class. And ever since then, that was in 7th grade. Ever since then, I've always had a sketchbook. And so in answer to your question, thinking through sketching, so not thinking and sketching, but thinking through sketching, as if your hands and the sketchbook are an extension of your brain, not separate. And that was really the genesis of that.
Man, that's awesome. I was looking through your website, and I was like, man, I love this stuff. I looked at your woodcuts, I looked at your, painterly stuff, and then I looked at your
Thank you.
sketchy section, and I was
Mhm.
like, oh, there's some there's some magic happening here. Like I was like,
Oh,
this is really
thank you.
I was like, this stuff is just so like all of it's good, but then I was looking at the sketchy stuff and I was like, I love like the one of the hog with the you on your website, you have one of like a hog with then a barn in the background. I love that sketch. I was like, that is awesome. So
Oh, no, I thought I had it, but I don't.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really
Yeah,
good.
I love it. I love it. So really digging into that style. I would sketching always, but it wasn't until oh the, this is another thing that I'd love to talk about with you guys and anybody who'll listen. When I graduated from college, I graduated from Dort College with an studio art degree. Dort is a small Christian college in Northwest Iowa, and I only went there because we brought a load of cattle there, and I checked out the art program while we were up there selling cattle. Um, but I liked it. I liked how small the campus was, and I hit it off with the art professor, Jake Van Wyk. I went to college wanting to learn all the tricks. I wanted to learn technically how to do art with excellence. I didn't want to go there and just learn how to express myself. I figured I had all sorts of life to express myself, but just teach me all the gold stuff that I need to improve my craft so I can make brilliant art. And then once I'm able to make brilliant art, then I can start to take it in unique directions. And so I had a pretty crystal clear plan for my life. I was going to graduate having learned all of these art tricks, and I was going to instantly rocket to fame and fortune as an illustrator. And I've heard other folks on your podcast talk in that sort of naive way. And boy, was I naive. I had no idea. But I did have a lot of confidence, and I was pretty sure of what I could do. I get out of college, marry my college sweetheart, and we move to the farm, believe it or not, and we raise goats on the side, and I kind of had it all planned. I was going to develop my portfolio, and then start rocketing to fame. However, God had different plans, and it was only a few months into our marriage when I got very, very sick. At the time, I was painting murals in mostly the homes of rich old ladies. I hope none of the rich old ladies are listening to this. Uh, and it was a good living, but I was noticing that my I couldn't hold my paintbrush steady anymore. That's what I noticed at first, and then I started noticing that I would forget stuff like my car keys. Sometimes I would leave my keys in the ignition and the car in drive when I would get out of the car. A lot of just stupid errors, and then I started getting other symptoms like achiness and fatigue, and uh, eventually it got to the point where I could barely work, and because it came on so slowly, it took us a while to figure out how to respond to this. Turned out I had Lyme disease. I don't remember when it was that I got bit by a tick, but I had been outside a lot over the course of my life, and so the crystal clear dream I had for rocketing to fame and fortune on my art carpet, that completely crumbled before my eyes, and I there was no way that I could produce art, um, that I could depend on myself to produce art consistently day in, day out. There was just no way. My fingers wouldn't work well enough, and my brain wouldn't work well enough. My thinking was very muddled during that time, and so we decide, it felt like, amputation of the dream, because I just was so convinced that this was God's plan for me, and also I'm going to be awesome at it. But it felt like it was all taken away from me in a very violent way. It just and so I went back to school via correspondence for art education, because even on my worst days, I can talk about art. It was my obsession for all these years. So I can, if I need to lay on my teacher's desk and provide instructions while laying back and yelling at students, I can do it because I love the subject so much. And so even though it was very much a painful plan B, I went into teaching. It just so happened that a full-time position opened up in my hometown of Pella, Iowa, just as I was finishing up my classes. And so I got to be my own supervising student teacher, and it just seemed like that path was made smooth for me. It was very much like accepting defeat to do that. I'd always heard that adage, those who can't teach. And I was hearing that worthless refrain in my head again. And I was really struggling. But in spite of my horrible attitude and horrible health, I began to realize through teaching that there was some magic happening, and it clearly God was using that whole experience to develop my character and to depend on community. And boy, I learned a lot. I taught for 12 years, and it was an incredibly rich, hard experience. I don't think I was ever a natural teacher, but it was so clear, made clear time and time again, that God had a plan to have me working as a teacher. Because I lived with chronic pain through those years, students felt like they could approach me with their own issues, whether that was emotional pain or physical. And I became somewhat of a after school counselor to a lot of kids who were struggling. And I learned that God can use us even in the midst of our plan B, and I could speak some amount of comfort into their lives when my students were struggling. And the other thing that came out of that was, on my worst days, when I'd be sitting at my desk before school, just praying for the energy to get up and do an art lesson. Every once in a while, I would feel a hand on my back, and it was another teacher who was just resting their hand on my shoulder and just praying silently over me before I would get up to go to work. And boy, I learned so much through that. And I still struggled. I still had this dream. I wanted to be an illustrator so bad, but I was definitely useful in that space. And I also learned that even though art is an important part of me, it's not all of me. And I learned that I wanted to prove to the world that I was not worthless. And I wanted to use art to do that, but I had to reframe and realize that there's a whole lot more to this life than proving something. And if you are coming at your existence from a place of proving something, I think you're missing out on a lot, missing out on some really important relationships. And anyway, yeah, I have no idea what question spurred that whole thing.
Joe, thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
In our weakness, he is strong.
yeah,
And
I'll say,
it wasn't his plan B.
yeah,
So,
right.
yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. During that time I went to counseling to kind of help process it. I had this image in my head of what a man should look like, and what a man should look like in my head looked a lot like my dad. My dad was and is a pretty great man. He's a hard worker, and he's got integrity, and he was always very active. And so I had this picture of, kind of this breadwinner, Superman. And when I was in the midst of the worst of my Lyme disease, there were years there where I would go into work and then I would come home for lunch, wrap myself real tight in a blanket, and go back to work for the afternoon, and then come home and wrap myself real tight in a blanket. And that is the opposite of what this picture was in my head of what a man should be. And I couldn't square that on my own. And so I went to a Christian counselor, and she was amazing. She helped me over the course of quite a few sessions. She helped me to realize that, maybe I need to re-envision what the man of the house should look like. I probably already should have re-envisioned that because I was an artist and not like some work with your hands, hardworking oil rig worker or whatever. But so my wife and I have 4 kids, and I don't need to be their soccer coach in order to be their daddy. And so I can still bless them. Even if on my worst day, I'm just stuck on the couch, I can still sit there and page through a book with them. And just having my child on my lap and spending time with them, listening to them babble crazy talk, it can really be a blessing. And they'll remember that, as good, even though it doesn't feel ideal to me. That was a really valuable lesson that I felt like I had to learn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you again for sharing that. I think it's good
Yeah.
for all of us to do what you said. Just reevaluate what our expectations are of what
Mm,
our vision is, and find out what God's vision
Mhm.
is, and then lean into that and be excited about it. And obviously you have, and the Lord has blessed, and you've been able to return to making art, which is a huge praise, I think. I'm sure you would
Boy,
say.
and I don't take it for granted for a single day.
Yeah.
Every day that I sit down to do artwork, I'm so thankful that there was a time when I didn't think I would physically be able to do art anymore. And to be able to pick up a pencil and not have pain is amazing.
Praise the
Amazing.
Lord. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. No kidding.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, as you pick up your pencil in the future,
Yeah.
what is that idea? What is that thing, that feeling, that whatever it is that you want to say? What is it that you want your future pieces to communicate? Whether it's an illustration or maybe you find another old lady that wants you to make you Merle. Who knows?
There's a surprising amount of those. So I've heard you ask that question of some other folks that you've interviewed, and I think that's a hard question because I really like to dabble in a lot of different things. And so finding, I've heard so many folks say, find this style, make sure your work is cohesive so you can have a brand. And I so see the importance of that. And there's a lot of artists that do have a consistent style that I just eat up. But for me, I don't know what it is, but this impulse to keep moving in different directions, and it drives my type A personality wife crazy that I'm always going in these different directions. But I love to experiment with different art media. That really helped me in teaching art, because every project was exciting for me. It didn't feel like, clay. I love clay, printmaking, painting, drawing. It's all good. I love it all. But I guess one way to answer that question is I love story. I love how pictures can tell a story, and so I hope that all my work in the future can really help tell a story really well. Yeah, I hope that my work can enrich whatever story is put in front of me. So it's more of I think of text or story and illustration as kind of a dance. It's not soldiers marching in lockstep. It's more like two partners in a tango, and one of the partners is moving in such a way as to show off the other partner, to put them on display. And I think that's what illustration does. When it's done well, it dances with the words. It doesn't just follow the orders of the words, but it moves in and through, and it catches some of the subtext, and helps illuminate that for the reader. And so I hope I'm doing that. I hope I do a lot of that.
Brilliant. Man, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you so much. Tell folks where they can follow you, and I'm sure on some of your locations there's links to things you've made and projects you're working on. So
Yeah,
tell
so
people about that.
my website is www.joehox.com, JOEHOX, and I'm also on Instagram at Joe Hox, and Facebook, and I've been on Twitter like 3 times, but then I get really scared and run away.
Once again, thank you so much to Joe for coming on the podcast this week. Be sure to follow Joe on Instagram at Joe Hox, HOX. So it's not just Joe. Don't just call him Joe, right? That's not how it works. He's not a waitress. What he is Joe Hox, HOX. And you can stay up to date with Joe's content. You can also see his artwork on joehox.com.
Yeah, and figure out where to buy that devotional book that him and his wife made together. Really encourage you guys to look into that, especially if you have family members who just you want to share this truth with, whether they're believers who need to be encouraged or maybe people who don't know the Lord that need to be shared truth with in a way that maybe they can consume it. I think that'd be really great.
Yeah,
Now,
even if you have family members that don't realize that the entire Bible is about Jesus, maybe they think that it's like a rule book or some sort of like, weird like history with a bunch of things going on. If you can, purchase that and then show them, hey, this is actually all about one person.
Yeah, what a valuable resource that is. Now, Mark, this is the part where I normally tell people to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Spreaker, Amazon, Google. I have to tell the folks, Joe Hox subscribes to the Creative Community Podcast he's been listening on Spotify. He subscribed to us on YouTube. So all I have to say about that is if you out there listening want to be an illustrator to the level that Joe is, you got to start somewhere, and you might as well start by subscribing to the Creative Community Podcast and putting us in your ears whenever you are working on work that allows you to kind of let your brain still function, but you're kind of doing muscle memory. That's what Mark usually does with his podcasts, and I know it's a big benefit for him. Helps him redeem the time And we hope it'll be a blessing and encouragement. And then leave us a comment or review with your favorite part of the show. It helps the algorithm know that you liked us. And then the other way you can feed the algorithm, we're all about just appeasing the big machine here at the Creative Community Podcast. That's a little bit of a joke, but you can send this to a friend. Mark, I had a friend send me a podcast yesterday. They sent me a screenshot. They said, listen to it from this timestamp. Guess what? Huge blessing. Exactly what I needed to hear. So if our listeners out there could do that for one of their friends, I think that would accomplish one of the goals we have, which is to encourage people.
Absolutely. And you can connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Destination Arete, Arete. And that's going to get you kind of moving on the train, right? It's going to keep you up to date with the future episodes that are coming out. We post little clips, little quotes. Maybe you're like, man, I never heard of this person before. I'm going to wait till the clip comes out, right? And then you listen to the clip and you say, oh yeah, I actually like that topic. I actually like that. And then you want to go listen to it. And then maybe you want to share that clip on your story to let other people know, hey, this is what I'm listening to right now as I draw, as I create, as I write. This is what I'm up to. So you can share that, and you can kind of also just follow us along there. And if you want to be the first to hear about upcoming interviews, sneak peeks at future content, that kind of stuff, our newsletter is a great place to do that. Joe Hox also subscribes to the newsletter. So if you want to be on that exclusive tier list with Joe, you can, like you said, if you want to be an illustrator, right? Why not begin your journey with where Joe is currently? You can just skip all the other steps. You just jump straight to where he is, right? Subscribing to our content. So you can subscribe in that way. Again, total joke, but you can subscribe to us in that way. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with another interview or maybe a fun episode. We'll see.